information. You guys go ahead and mute yourselves if you know how to do that to cut down on the background noise. And then I need to give you guys an update. Let me find the update. So Pastor Ken isn't here today, and we have been praying for Ray McCown, who is an alumni of Breaking Bread for a couple of years. He came to us right after his wife passed, and in a very troubled way. And hopefully we had some role or some part in helping to stabilize him and get him through that awful transition. But Ray contracted COVID in early January, wound up in various ICU units, and Ray is still in the hospital. We're now going on day 60. So Ken spoke with him. He doesn't have much of a voice. The COVID has not only damaged his lungs, he can no longer walk. He's lost a lot of the use of his arms and hands, so he's extraordinarily weak. And so they're working with him, physical therapy, I think 3 times a day. He's going through various types of therapy, but it's a long road back. And Ken very honestly just said he's not doing well. But a lot of his not doing well is just discouragement. He feels like he's not making any progress. He's not getting any stronger. There is damage to his lungs. It's difficult for him to speak. So what Ken thought, and actually I'm going to give proper credit, Rosie, Ken's wife, thought would be a good idea, is if we just wrote a note to Ray while he's in the hospital. If you can imagine being stuck in a hospital, and he's not, to my understanding, in an ICU unit anymore, but being stuck in a hospital for 2 months is you would get discouraged, guys. And that's what I want you guys to stand in the gap and be the arms and hands of Jesus, okay? So some of you don't know Ray, that's okay. Tell him you're a Breaking Bread current alumni and you understand he's a former Breaking Bread alumni, all right? And there's the connection point. And maybe it's a card or maybe it's just a little note that you drop on him. But we're going to periodically do this until Ray is out of the woods. And hopefully Ken will serve as a good reminder point for me. So what I have for you, you'll address it to Kindred Hospital. And that's spelled Kindred, Kindred Hospital. Their address is 765 NASA Boulevard. This will also be on the recording because I know I have several people who listen to this on the video. I want you guys to do it as well, whether you're listening live or as a recording. That's Melbourne, and the zip 32901. Now, when you address that, you will want to put that to room 234, pretty easy to remember, just sequential, room 234. And his name is Ray, and the last name I'll spell it, big M, little c, big C, O-W-N, like you're gonna own something. Big M, little c, big C, O-W-N. If you guys could do that for me, I would be very much appreciative. Take comfort in knowing that when he gets those letters, even from people he doesn't know, guess what that's going to do? It's telling him that people are thinking of him. Remember, he has no spouse. His wife died a couple of years ago. So we're going to stand in the gap for Ray, and we're gonna send him notes of encouragement. And by the way, we would do the same for you if the shoe were on the other foot, okay? All right. And again, that will be on the recording, so you can get that, or you can ask me towards the end. All right, launching in. 10 pages of notes. Told you I wouldn't do that to you guys again. I guess I lied. I asked you guys to do some homework. Not sure how many of you did the homework, but the homework was, yay, I see some hands going up. Read Ezekiel 22 in whatever version of the Bible that you have, and write down questions about stuff that maybe you didn't understand when you read through your version, and I will answer those specific questions here towards the end. The reason I did that is it's actually twofold. I was going through this chapter, and as you know, we've had kind of a theme going. I didn't mean for there to be a theme, but there's been a theme going the last couple of weeks. And I thought I was done with the theme, you know, when I give you your main points. But apparently, as I read through this, I got to verse 30 and 31, and God goes, boom, that's what I want you to talk about. And it relates to the previous 2 weeks. So guess what, guys? I'm going to continue to beat that dead horse. So here we go. What I asked you to think about was this, and I didn't want a really quick flip answer. What's more important to you? Your citizenship of the United States or your citizenship of heaven? And I know everybody's going to go, oh, heaven, of course. I want you to reflect back on the last 5 months. I want you to think a couple of months before the election and a couple of months after the election. And I want you to self-assess and reflect. How did you spend your time, your resources, your focus, your passion? Were you out kind of getting sucked into the media and the news and bashing them, they, as opposed to us? Where were you in that? Now, I mentioned last week, and I'll re-emphasize it because I don't want to be accused of being a commie or anything, but we are not citizens of a dictatorship. We are citizens of a republic. So as citizens of a republic, a government of the people and for the people, we have certain responsibilities and duties. In no way, shape, or form did I say to shirk those responsibilities, did I, last week? But where was your master passion? Where was your emphasis? Where is the emphasis, church? I will build a case today that I think, using some of the things that we've talked about the last 2 weeks and today, that the church, there's not going to be a revival in the US unless, and it has nothing to do with cancel culture. It has nothing to do with who's the dominant political party. It has nothing to do with them versus us. By the way, there is no them. It's all just us. It has nothing to do with that. You know why there's not going to be a revival? Because the church is letting everyone down. The church is not fulfilling its prime role and obligation. And one of the reasons why is because the church is beginning to lose its power and its grip and its political might. And it's beginning to get defensive and thin-skinned and lash out. I told you the reason a week or two ago that I got on this topic was because I listened to a pastor's conference of a denomination that I highly respect. And if he wasn't the keynote, he was one of their keynote speakers, was a pastor from another state. And his entire discussion was political. Now, his church had been unfairly shut down during the COVID pandemic. I'm not arguing that point. But when your keynote speaker talks all about political for over an hour and a half and not about what the main message of the church should be, then we have a problem, people. We have a problem. And the church, not the culture, is the problem. So, what I'm going to do today, as you think about what really is more important to me, citizenship in the US or citizenship of heaven? What am I doing? How am I acting? How am I behaving? Am I reacting with vitriol and hatred Or am I reacting in love? So when we read through the chapter 22, it's kind of a recap chapter of all the things God's been talking about Israel in their fallen state. And it kind of follows a formula. Now, some of you will plug the US into this formula. I have no idea if we're this close to having a massive revival in this country because the church gets its act together and we're not featured in end time prophecy because we all get raptured and there is no more United States. That's possible. It's also possible that we'll do what Israel does and fall apart and decay from within. I don't know the answer to that, but I do know that we, each one of us, have responsibility for the outcome. So the formula is something like this. We're going to chase after false gods, and that is going to equal or lead to moral and societal decay, which then equals or leads to forgetting God, which equals or leads to judgment and destruction. Now, any of you guys who stuck with me for the first 21 chapters of Ezekiel knows how this is going to end because Ezekiel's already told us how this is going to end. We already know that they rejected their discipline and they ended up getting walloped because of it. So what Ezekiel 22 talks about, and again, it uses a couple of different metaphors. One is that of a jungle. Another is that of a melting pot where various metals are thrown in. And he uses these different metaphors. And I'm going to read this, and I'll just let me read all the way through to the end. And then I'll do just a very high level recap. I know normally we go verse by verse, but this week is different. I'm not going to go verse by verse unless you have a specific question about one of the specific verses. And then trust me, I've got 10 pages of notes here that I can refer to answer your question. But I'm not going to go through the 10 pages of notes, and nobody needs to freak out and leave the broadcast right now. I'm not going to do that. I'm going to read today from a paraphrased version. I've done this only once before that I can recall on the Zoom version. I'm going to read from the Message Bible. Why am I going to do that? I do not study from the Message Bible. I study, actually, you guys know, from the New King James Version. But the way the Message Bible paraphrases 22 makes the chapter exceedingly and abundantly understandable. And it may answer a lot of the questions that you may have written down in your homework. So if you're ready, seatbelt yourself in. Here we go. Ezekiel chapter 22. God's message came to me, Son of Man. And I will interject some stuff in here as I go. Son of Man is what God called Ezekiel. Are you going to judge this bloody city or not? Sad that Israel wasn't called the Holy City anymore. He referred to it by its new name, the bloody city. Come now, are you going to judge her? Do it. Face her with all her outrageous obscenities. Tell her this is what God the Master says. You're a city, murderous at the core, just asking for punishment. You're a city obsessed with no God idols, making yourselves filthy. In all of your killing, you've piled up guilt. In all of your idol making, you've become filthy. You forced a premature end. Note that. You have forced a premature end to your existence. I'll put you on exhibit as the scarecrow of the nations, the world's worst joke. From far and near, they'll deride you as infamous in filth, notorious for chaos. Your leaders, the princes of Israel among you, compete in crime. You're a community that's insolent to parents, abusive to outsiders, oppressive against orphans and widows. You treat my holy things with contempt and desecrate my Sabbaths. You have people spreading lies and spilling blood, flocking to the hills of sex shrines and fornicating unrestrained. Incest is common. Men force themselves on women, regardless of whether they're ready or willing. Sex is now anarchy. Anyone is fair game. Neighbor, daughter-in-law, sister. Murder is for hire. Usury is rampant. Extortion is commonplace. And here's, wow, this is the end to all ends. And you have forgotten me, decree of God, the Master. Now look, I've clapped my hands. I've called everyone's attention to your rapacious greed and your bloody brutalities. Can you stick with it? Will you be able to keep at this once I start dealing with you? I, God, have spoken. I'll put an end to this. I'll throw you to the four winds. I'll scatter you all over the world. I'll put a full stop to your filthy living. You will be defiled, spattered with your own mud in the eyes of the nations, and you'll recognize that I am God. Now, God's message came to me. Son of man, the people of Israel are like slag to me, the useless byproduct of refined copper, tin, iron, and lead left at the smelter, a worthless slag heap. So tell them, God the Master has spoken. Because you have all become worthless slag, you're on notice. I'll assemble you in Jerusalem as men gather silver, copper, iron, lead, and tin into a furnace, and I'm going to blow fire on it to melt it down. So in my wrath, I'll gather you and melt you down. I'll blow on you with the fire of my wrath to melt you down in my furnace. As silver is melted down, you will be melted down. That should get through to you. Then you'll recognize that I, God, have let my wrath loose on you. God's message came to me. Son of man, tell her you're a land that during the time I was angry with you got no rain, not so much as a spring shower. Well, the leaders among you became desperate. They're like roaring, ravaging lions, killing indiscriminately. They grabbed, they looted, they left widows in their wake. Your priests violated my laws and desecrated my holy things. They can't tell the difference between sacred and secular. They tell people there's no difference between right and wrong. They're contemptuous of my holy Sabbaths, profaning me by trying to pull me down to their level. Your politicians are like wolves, prowling and killing and rapaciously taking whatever they want. Your preachers cover up for the politicians by pretending to have received visions and special revelations. They say, oh, this is what God the Master says, when God hasn't so much said one word. Extortion is rife. Robbery is epidemic. The poor and the needy are abused. Outsiders are kicked around at will with no access to justice. I looked for someone to stand up for me in all of this, to repair the defenses of the city, to take a stand for me and stand in the gap to protect this land so I would not have to destroy it. Saddest statement you'll ever read. And I couldn't find anyone, not one. So I'll empty out my wrath on them. I'll burn them to a crisp with my hot anger. I'll serve them with the consequences of all they have done. Decree of God, the Master. Okay, that was intense. Was that pretty self-explanatory? Okay, so I thought this was going to be a recap chapter until I got to verse 30 and 31. But let me summarize this whole chapter first, high level, not verse by verse. I'll stop. I'll ask you to take yourselves off mute and see if you had specific questions before I read you verse 30 and 31 again, this time from the New King James Version. So God is describing all of Israel like it's a jungle, like it's a dog-eat-dog jungle. The prophets are like lions. The princes are like wolves. They're all fighting to get what they can from the people. The leaders of Israel corruptly mistreated and abused others instead of protecting them. Now, it was no surprise that the people of the land began to imitate the behavior of their leaders, preying upon each other and preying on those weaker than them with violence and oppression. The rich and the powerful abused the middle class, and the middle class abused the poor, and the poor then finally abused the powerless, the widows, the orphans, the strangers in the land, who were then left holding the bag as the final recipients of abuse. Like animals, the priests, the ones that should be out there telling people the difference between right and wrong, they couldn't tell the difference between the holy and the unclean. The political leaders that they had entrusted to protect them used their offices not only to shed innocent blood, but to get rich. And the prophets, these were the false prophets, the prophets, they saw the cracks in the foundation of the whole structure. The whole thing's going to come down. And instead of declaring it to be defective, you know what they did? In the original language, it says they daubed the wall with untempered mortar. You know what that means? Marty, your house is built to concrete and it's got structural cracks all the way through it and it's going to collapse next week. You know what the prophets did? They came in there with some stucco and just kind of covered it up. They spent their whole time telling everybody, there's no problem. It's okay. Keep on doing what you're going to do. The Babylonians aren't going to get us. God's not going to judge us. We're just chosen people. And the whole time, he's got Jeremiah in Israel telling him, turn. You better yield to the Babylonians. This is God's hand in that discipline. You got Ezekiel telling them. You got Daniel telling them. Did they listen? Nope. The whole time. And here's a loving father that was saying, now get this, guys, because this is the summary of all of 22, and I finished it in the soonest I've ever done a summary chapter. Here it is. Even if I have to destroy your country, even if I have to burn your city to the ground, even if I have to scatter you to the four corners of the world, I'll do whatever it takes to cleanse you and free you from this idolatry that's going to kill you. I told you my pet peeve. People who look at the Old Testament but don't read it and say, oh, God is so, look how cruel he is. This is his own people. Look what he's doing to his own people. God is so cruel to come down so harshly on his own people. In reality, if you read the dadgum book, what is God doing? He's saying, he's like a loving father. He's saying, if this is what it takes to purge you of these tendencies that are going to kill you, then I will do whatever it takes in order to save you. And save them he did. He had to do, they went the hard way. They could have just relented and given into the Babylonians, and there wouldn't have been this massive destruction that's going to happen in about 2.5 years from when this is written. And the city wouldn't have been leveled, the country wouldn't have been destroyed, the people wouldn't have been deported. But nope, they rejected God's discipline. They thumbed their nose and said, none of that's ever going to happen to us. And God had to take them into exile for 70 years. But you know what? As harsh as that is, when they came out from those 70 years, Israel never messed around with idolatry again. It cured them once and for all. So guys, move this forward. This really should be a warning, a loving warning to us, to you. Put it down to the individual level. I'll wait till Donna swallows that big swig she just took so she doesn't choke on it, because I was going to use her as an example. Donna, God loves you so much, has a plan for your life. You are so precious to him. He will stop at nothing to keep you from screwing yourself up. Now, yes, you have free will, but God will orchestrate all kinds of things, yes, even things that seem like calamities, in order to keep you from growing so far astray that you walk away from him. Do you get that? And that, guys, should be our takeaway and our message. This is not a message of judgment. This is a message of love and discipline. All right, now take yourselves off mute for a second. And then I'll bring home the main message. Did you guys have any questions from your reading? I asked you to read Ezekiel 22. Is there anything that you need me to go over in any of the verses that you were like, what does that mean? Or what does that mean?
Dan?
Yes, ma'am.
I actually read it from the message.
Oh.
I usually do that before we get together because it's quicker reading and easier.
Yep.
And what I came away with is that I have to be discerning in what I hear, even at the pulpit, you know, and I go to a Methodist church and think that everybody there, especially the pastor, believes in God's word and follows it. But there are degrees of that belief and following. And I believe that I must be discerning and definitely listen to what is said, but also rely on my knowledge. Not that I'm better or smarter or anything, but rely on the knowledge God has given me from his word as to the way things should be and what I should do.
Excellent. Well said. You get an A+ star on the class today.
Oh, thank you.
Ultimately, our source is God and his word. Now, we are to go and engage in churches, but there are no perfect churches. There are no perfect pastors. There's no perfect Bible teachers. There's nobody is perfect except Jesus himself. So everything, I just so remember that story. It sticks always in my mind of Paul. Paul's talking to this group of people, the Bereans, and they're like, you know, that kind of sounds good. That kind of sounds right. But you know what we're going to do? We're going to go check it against scripture, because they recognized that was the ultimate authority. And we always need to do what Donna's saying. We always need to have filters on, and that filters the Bible, and we need to filter what we hear. Now, obviously, the more time you spend in the Bible, when you hear something wackadoodle, you may not be able to quote chapter and verse. That's a theological term, by the way, wackadoodle. You may not be able to quote chapter and verse about what's wrong with that, but you know something's not right, and you should start digging like the Bereans did. So there, you know, again, there is no perfect church. The minute I join that church, it's not going to be perfect anymore because I'm not perfect. So we're to be in fellowship. We're to be receiving the teaching. But by the same token, what Donna said, we need to have discernment. Excellent point, Donna. Thank you.
Lynn, I was thinking we need to leave the church that we're in if we're being fed there, but if it's not giving us the full living word, then we need to find that out through reading our own scriptures and our own Bibles, doing the discernment like she was talking about, because it's so easy to get callous or lukewarm about our beliefs and start believing what everything is spoken to us. And that's what scares me about our country right now.
Well, you're spot on, John, because and you guys are all doing this, by the way. You could just go to church on Sunday or Saturday night or whenever your services are, and that's it. I'm done. 6 days of the week and do whatever I want. We're to be in the word constantly, communicating, fellowshipping with God, constantly praying. That's the way we're going to grow, and that's the way we're going to keep that discernment up, and that's the way we're going to constantly have the word filtering into us, and so that we can see the world and what's happening in our world through the proper lens, through the proper perspective. And that happens through a daily walk. It's like you don't eat once a week food. Yeah, you got, I'm sure, unless any of you are, I don't look like any of you are starving to death out there. So I'm assuming you eat at least once a day. So It's the same way about feeding your spirit. You got to eat daily.
Mhm.
All right, I got 2 minutes on this session. Any other questions or things that you want me to cover before we pick up in session 2? All right, Marty, are you raising your hand or is that just a pencil sticking up in the air?
No, I was just thinking to myself out loud. I just don't know where we, if we are the church, where we should turn for the authoritative, biblical honesty that you're referring to, that Ezekiel referred to. I don't see where we can turn so that we will not. We are very weak as individuals, but strong as a group. But I don't see where we can turn to make any impact. It's almost like I feel a sense of resignation.
Oh my
That's
gosh,
sad.
you cannot understand how profound, nearly prophetic that statement is, because that, my friend, is what your main message is today. What God has called you to do in this culture that we live in. But to find out that answer, this is like Lost in Space with Dr. Smith. You're going to have to tune in to episode 2. So I'm going to have everybody sign off. And then the reason we do this, Bill, is because Zoom limits me to 40 minutes and then they chop me off. So sign off and then sign right back on again. And we'll continue with session 2 in about 1 minute. I'll see you back here in just a sec.